Welcome to the 15-Minute Patriot Podcast. I'm Ross the Dude Maher from Rhode Island, and I'm joined by my colleagues Dave the Wildman Wilder out of Southeast Massachusetts and David Sod from the free state of Florida. We know there are many outlets and sites for you to collect your news from, but here at the 15-Minute Patriot, we focus on what the news should prompt you to do. We focus on action steps. Knowledge is important, of course, but citizenship requires action. And if you'll take even just 15 minutes a month, you will be surprised, possibly even amazed to see what you can accomplish. We, the people, are at the top of the government, and it's time to get involved. Lastly, we want to hear from you and about the things that you've done. So you can email us at 15minutepatriot@gmail.com. So that's 15minutepatriot spelled out at gmail.com, or on Facebook. You want to spell out the word 15, but it's 15-Minute Patriot. And with that, Dave the Wildman's in the lead.
Okay. So we're talking about, how citizens can be active. And there's some big things happening, right? Doge is all over the news. And so the biggest way to make changes is to make an amendment. So we're going to be talking about issues relating to amending the Constitution. But I thought before we get started, we have to have a solid foundation of what our government is all about. And we are in a federal republic. And so, for instance, if you ask most people, what are the three branches of government and are they co-equal? Most people will say, well, we got the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, and they're co-equal. The problem is that's wrong. We do have three branches, but they are not co-equal. If you look at the Constitution, half of our Constitution, over half, talks about Congress, and that's Article 1. There's 2,268 words talking about the House and Senate, their enumerated powers, what they can and cannot do. There's a very, very important primary point of our government. This is where we, the people's voice, is heard. Next is Article 2 in the Constitution, and that talks about the president. And that has a little over 1,000 words. Very important. Again, Congress sets up where the money is going and what to do. And the executive branch is the boss. He's running the day-to-day business. And so what's left? The judiciary. All the federal courts and SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States. Anybody have an idea of how many words the Constitution spends on judiciary?
Sir.
Okay, what do you have to do?
How about 176?
That's exactly right. Only 176 words. And if you look in the Federalist Papers and the writings of the founders, they were fearful of an active judiciary. And that's a whole nother topic that we can get into in another session. But I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same playing field about what our government's all about. So we have Congress and the enumerated powers. Amendment 10 explicitly states if Congress isn't given the power, they don't have it. Congress can appoint courts. They have full control about the court system, the judges. If they meet, if Congress wants to shut down the scope of the Supreme Court, they have the power to do so. Congress has the power to tell the Supreme Court that there's some topics that they can't talk about. And that happened in 1867 about a habeas corpus issue. Congress told Supreme Court, nope, you can't judge on this when this is outside your purview, and the Supreme Court agreed with that. So Congress is the top of our federal government, central government. Then you have the boss, the executive branch, their management and enforcement. They can make appointments, but they can't confirm them. Congress has to confirm them. So what's the balancing power the executive has? Well, the veto power and setting up priorities, the bully pulpit, if you will. And SCOTUS and the judiciary really can only arbitrate if something is constitutional or not, and that's it. So with that, if we all have a kind of the same foundation of what we're talking about when we're talking about the U.S. government, how do we change it? So what do you think, Dave? Did I blow your mind there?
Yeah, but Article 5 allows several ways to amend the Constitution. And again, stop me if I'm wrong, but of course, Congress, 2/3 of Congress, both houses, can write an amendment, bounce it up to the president, and then it has to go to the states. And 3/4 of the state, 3/4 rather, 2/3 of the states, 2/3 of the states' legislatures have to pass it.
3/4. Ratification is 3/4.
States is 3/4?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I thought it was 2/3, but then it's 2/3 of the states. If the state, there's another way of making an amendment, and that is that the states, 2/3 of the states, can, I can't think of the correct word, but they can
make
appeal to make application to Congress and say, hey, there's 2/3 of us that want to get together and we want to hold a convention for the purpose of possibly creating an amendment.
Yep.
And Congress has to act on it. They don't have no other, they can't deny it.
Correct.
Correct? Okay.
Correct.
And based on that, they would hold a convention. And at the convention, they would, discuss whatever amendment or amendments they want to make and then vote on them. And if it passes there, it goes to Congress.
It goes for the states to ratify.
But then it has to go back to Congress. No?
Convention of States proposal for an amendment goes straight from the Convention of States proposals to state ratification. Congress cannot get in the way.
So right now, we have 19 states that are on board with holding a convention of states.
Yeah, according to the convention. Actually, we have an expert on our team right here, a regional spokesman. Had a rising star was on a local radio show. Ross, what do you think about Article 5 Convention of States?
Well, first off, I think an Article 5 Convention of the States would be an amazing thing for us to be able to actually experience in our lifetime. So when you think about this, anytime you want to even have a discussion about an amendment, any amendment, you can go back to the first, second, pick your amendment. It really doesn't matter. They've all had to observe this process as Dave Sod was laying out. Either the Congress initiates or the states initiate, and then ratification is the same. So we've never actually had a convention of the states for the purposes of developing proposals for amendments. So to experience that in our lifetime, I think would be really, really amazing. One thing that I do want to point out is that there are a lot of different organizations in today's day who have initiated, we'll just call them their own efforts. They have a particular topic that they're fond of, whether it's something fiscally related or term limit related or whatever the case may be. And so they, using their own energies, have been going from state to state to try to get those states to make their application. Dave Sod was pointing out one particular group that we all know, and it's actually called Convention of States. And actually, it's called Convention of States Action. That was the number 19 that Dave Sod was referring to. So 19 states have made application to call for a convention. And those resolutions amongst those states, they all call for the same three topics. So it's fiscal restraints. So like you could call it balanced budgets, imposing term limits on federal officials as well as members of Congress, and then to reduce size and scope of the federal government. Now, Dave, the Wild Man, I know that you're well versed on another group that has, focused on like single subject. Do you want to highlight any of those?
Sure. And the whole point here is take a step back and assess, are we at a place where the Constitution outlined? Is Congress at the top of the heap? Is the executive branch doing its function? Is the judiciary the minor voice in this whole thing? I come to the conclusion that we're all messed up. We have all sorts of over the last 150 years, those powers have been taken away from the Congress and given to SCOTUS or the executive branch, and certainly away from the states. So there is a need to make adjustments. And so Convention of States is a great organization talking about the three topics, term limits, fiscal responsibility, and stopping government overreach, putting the federal government back in their constitutional box. There's also term limits. There's a group that's focusing solely on term limits, and they've passed in 9 states. And if you count, the Convention of States also looking for term limits, they're also in 19. And there's also a very interesting group, the Federal Fiscal Sustainability Foundation. They have done the research in our history and have identified there are 40 state applications that can address fiscal responsibility for the federal government. Wow. So if you know your numbers, 40 is a bigger number than 34, meaning that Congress is derelict in their constitutional requirements of calling a convention. And there's other groups out there. So again, with the 15-minute Patriot, if you have a passion for a topic, look into groups that have Article 5 efforts, and maybe you want to get involved. So,
How many states right now have a bill in their Congress or state legislatures that address this for the legislators to vote on?
So be a little more specific. All right. Do you mean the Convention of States action resolution
because-
or something else?
No, the resolution to call a convention. I know that
Got it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Florida,
off.
where I live, has already voted on it and passed it. I know
Yes.
that there was a bill in Massachusetts, one in Rhode Island.
Yep.
And I know of several other states, quite a few other states. I don't know the number.
So when
that
I
have-
last looked at the progress map on conventionofstates.com, there were 11 states that had submitted resolutions for this year. So a couple of them, South Dakota and one other, escapes me right now, might have been, I don't know, not Idaho, but one of their neighboring states. They very, very quickly were able to move through committee or subcommittee and get to the floors of their respective houses. So South Dakota almost made it. It got through their Senate, it got through committee in the House, and it failed on a floor vote in their House. There are a couple others that are coming up that have passed subcommittees, committees, or moving towards their floors. Iowa, Idaho, Kansas, and Wyoming are all somewhere in process. And I'll tell you a real interesting one about Kansas is there's not, apparently Kansas has a rule. It's not even like a constitutional amendment of their state constitution. It's a rule that most of us feel is unconstitutional. And that rule somehow defines that if they're passing any type of a resolution for anything constitutionally related, it has to be a super majority. That's not laid out anywhere. Certainly not laid out in the U.S. Constitution. I don't believe that's laid out in the Kansas state constitution. Like I said, it's a rule, and rules can change, So that's being litigated. Its constitutionality is being questioned. And so potentially, if that lawsuit were to settle sometime soon, potentially Kansas could be the 20th state. At the same time, any one of the other states that I just mentioned also could be the 20th state. And then locally or more regionally here in New England, like you just mentioned, yes, Massachusetts is pending committee, right, Dave? Wildman? Massachusetts is pending committee hearing?
It's the last session. We passed all committees,
Mhm.
and we're just waiting for the call to have a House vote. And that never happened because the Speaker of the House was not in favor. So we're going to have to go through the same process again.
Yeah. So New Hampshire made it through committee. And so they're pending a floor vote. Rhode Island, we have testimony tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon. So we'll see where that gets us. Now, interesting for us, we've done, so two interesting things happened. One, we had a co-sponsor. So we've had the same sponsor for the last 3 years. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the lone independent in the entire legislature of the state of Rhode Island signs on as co-sponsor. So that was pretty wild.
Awesome. Yeah.
And So there was a kerfluffle, let's say. And so the initial resolution had to be rescinded. It was fixed and then resubmitted. So what you would see now, if you were to go look at it, is that independent guy there is no co-sponsor. So instead, what he's willing to do is come around, from behind, and he sits on this committee too. So this is all really interesting stuff. So you're talking about like 15-minute Patriot and all the things that you can do as an individual. I called this guy and I said, hey, thanks for co-sponsoring. B, did you know it got rescinded and you're no longer the co-sponsor? And he didn't. So I was the one informing him he was no longer co-sponsor. And then I kind of capitalized on that and asked him if he would, he's not in the leadership of the committee where the actual sponsor is. So he's like the second chair or something like that. So I asked the one independent, can you, would you be willing to speak on our behalf, to kind of grease the skids for all of us to then, do our piece? And of course he said yes. The other thing that we're doing differently is we've actually smushed together two resolutions into one. So this is a real interesting thing. So a lot of the people, regardless of the subject, whether it's, the fiscal stuff that the federal fiscal guys for awesomeness are doing. I'm sorry, Dave, what is that group? The federal FFSF.
Just rolls off the tongue.
It's something about physical sustainability. So
Federal Fiscal Sustainability Foundation.
Regardless of what the topic is, opponents of this tend to come up with pretty much the same, grouping of answers. It's a lot of fear. We're afraid. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. Of course, you're not going to know what the outcome is going to be. You never know what the outcome of anything is going to be. So it's really a ridiculous thing to say. But they're afraid of what the outcomes are. They talk about how it's going to put us into constitutional chaos, which is ironic because we're talking about using a constitutional tool in order to be able to rein back our government's powers and authorities that we've ceded. So what Convention of States Action has done is they've taken the time to develop a separate resolution, and they simply refer to it as a commissioner's selection resolution. So it kind of gives a framework for states to say, here's how we're going to select our commissioners when the convention's called. Here's how we're going to select them. Here's how many we're going to select. And it starts to, by default, starts putting in some rules for them to follow, such as whether our state, let's just say, the convention is upon us and Rhode Island did not vote in favor of it. So they're not one of the 34. Okay. So the point is whether your state is one of the 34 or whether your state is not one of the 34, you cannot go beyond the scope of the topics that the convention has been called for. So right away, it's starting to put in guardrails for anyone to not to undermine the efforts of the convention and generally keep things on track. So,
well, your experience of talking to that independent rep in the House. This just goes along to what we're all about here in the 15-minute Patriot. I mean, we've talked about a lot of things here, but you can see how one person can influence what happens in your state legislature. So,
and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but
that's our job. Yeah.
But you're exactly right. It's the sponsor. I live in his district. I reached out to him. He became the sponsor. He happens to be friends with the co-sponsor. We've testified before that co-sponsor twice now. He's always sat through it and listened to it. And then something prompted him to sign on, and then reaching out and talking with them. And, so that's really to Dave's point, that we're trying to inspire you to do things. Don't feel beat down that, the old saying used to be, you can't beat City Hall. No, actually you can. You have to learn the game. You have to learn the rules like every other game. And I'm not a sports fan, but I know Dave Sod, you're a big time sports fan. Would you agree with me that if you want to play a game, you have got to learn that game? You've got to learn the rules
inside out.
Yep. Yeah. Then you can start to learn strategy of how to outmaneuver, your opponent team, or if it's a one-on-one, and this is very much the same way. You've got to learn the rules of the game in order to
and that starts with the Constitution, as Dave pointed out earlier, that Congress has more power than I ever knew. I thought they were equal branches of government.
Yeah. Okay, this is a we the people thing. So in closing, I hope this was a good introduction I would say a great assignment for a 15-minute Patriot is to take a look at Article 5 movements. Maybe it's conventionofstates.com. Maybe it's termlimits.com. Maybe it's the roll off the tongue easy ffsf.us group. But get involved. And this week, contact your state rep about their role in forwarding what the people want, and that's an Article 5 Convention of States. And with that, thank you all. Love to hear from you. We'll talk soon.